My name is John Lobell. I teach architecture at Pratt Institute. I blog at creativitydiscourse.com. I review movies from a mythological point of view at cinemadiscourse.com. And you can reach me at johnlobell at mac.com. So this is a sketch for a lecture on Joseph Campbell. So it's just an outline, and it can be adopted for the interests of an audience, the degree of familiarity of an audience with Campbell, and the amount of time available. And it could also be used as an introduction for a series, and for more in-depth lectures on Campbell and his ideas. Two examples already on YouTube are a lecture on Joseph Campbell's Symbol Without Meaning, and then looking at movies from a mythological point of view based on Campbell's ideas. You can find these two lectures by searching on those titles on YouTube, and I can also develop lectures on any of Campbell's books and themes. The talk that follows I did sitting at a desk in front of a computer. So to get a sense of my much more lively presentation in front of an audience, if you look on YouTube and search on John Lobell 60s Architecture Live or John Lobell Baroque Architecture, these are lectures given in class in front of an audience and are quite lively. My qualifications to do this lecture include the following. First, my involvement with Joseph Campbell. I attended his lectures. I was lucky to do so for a period of 10 years in New York, read most of his books, interviewed Joe several times, reviewed his Inner Reaches of Outer Space for Quadrant. I was a founding member of the Board of Advisors for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, editor for several years of the Joseph Campbell Foundation newsletter. I wrote a little book for the foundation, Joseph Campbell, the Man and His Ideas, co-authored with Stephen and Robin Larson. I wrote articles on Campbell, Campbell on Freud and Jung, and a primer on Joseph Campbell. And I've lectured on Campbell at the New York Open Center, Esalen Institute, the Parliament of the World's Religions, and Pratt Institute, among other places. And my own background, my education in architecture at the University of Pennsylvania, saw architecture as a crystallization of a culture, very much the way Campbell sees myths. I studied Buddhism with Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Lobsang Samten, took many workshops on Buddhism with the Dalai Lama and Robert Thurman, among others, studied Tai Chi with Professor Chungming Chen, and studied shamanism with Michael Harner, and had, before I even met Campbell, had already read some of the key figures influencing Campbell, including Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, Friedrich Nietzsche, lots of Freud and Jung. And I wrote a book, Between Silence and Light, Spirit and the Architecture of Louis I. Kahn, which looks at Kahn's architecture in the context of spiritual thought, a lot of it paralleling Campbell's ideas, and my own research has been on structures of consciousness, again, a lot of it paralleling Campbell's ideas. So I come to the material with a strong background of my own. So, Joseph Campbell, 1904 to 1987. So who was Joseph Campbell? A comparative mythologist. He addressed mythology, religion, art, literature, pretty much all of culture. And he is a major 20th century figure. So you can make your list, but certainly in mine, Campbell is one of the major figures of the 20th century. Very brief on background. This is about Campbell's ideas, not Campbell's life, but just to get us oriented, Campbell studied at Columbia University, medieval languages, and to pursue his studies, he after finishing his master's degree, went to Europe, where he not only pursued the medieval literature, but became exposed to modern ideas, not yet very prevalent in the United States: Freud, Jung, Picasso, Mondrian and other modern artists, and James Joyce and Thomas Mann. He came back from Europe, and Columbia was not interested in having him incorporate these new ideas in his academic work. The stock market had crashed. He rented a house in Woodstock, New York for $50 a year, bought books on credit, and read 9 hours a day from 1929 to 1934. Thorough reading, notes in the margins. His library is at Pacifica, and you can see these notes in his margins. He retained the material. He then taught at Sarah Lawrence from 1934 to 1972 for 38 years. He married the dancer and choreographer Jean Erdman, wrote key books on mythology, and Campbell was well known. His first major book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, was on the New York Times bestseller list. He was involved with major cultural institutions, and then after his retirement, he lectured widely all over the country and even around the world from 1972 until shortly before his death. So what was Campbell's approach? First of all, he was strong in a wide range of cultures. He knew American Indian culture, Indian culture, Japan, China, primitive material. So he was very strongly versed in the full range of the global cultures. His approach was inclusive of all of culture. In other words, when he speaks about mythology, he's not just talking about myths and fairy tales, but he is addressing art, architecture, literature, religion, without boundaries and inclusively. He referred to the notion of the human desire for experience as opposed to just to understand things, but rather not to understand the meaning of life, but to experience life. His approach included the notion that myths live in us today, which made his message very appealing to his audiences. And he took an approach that saw an in-touchness with transcendence. He saw myth as a metaphoric language that illuminated all of existence: personal, spiritual, cultural, cosmological. Thus, we might say that Campbell gives us a supra-psychology presenting the underlying principles of the self, culture, and the cosmos. Now, why was Campbell so popular? Well, first of all, he was a wonderful storyteller. His presentations were informative about all of the world's traditions, but most important, he presented myth as applicable to our lives. A quote from The Hero with a Thousand Faces: "The latest incarnation of Oedipus, the continued romance of Beauty and the Beast, stands this afternoon on the corner of 42nd Street and 5th Avenue waiting for the traffic light to change." And above I have an illustration of that intersection from around the time that Campbell wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces. In addition, he presented a third way between fundamentalism and materialism. So, do we take religious traditions to be true, or do we take a materialistic view of the universe? Maybe there's another way, that myths are true, not literally, but metaphorically. Now, below, we see the three-part entrance to a Gothic cathedral, Chartres, And Campbell would talk about this as entering between the pairs of opposites of the phenomenal world. So you're going beyond the phenomenal world of opposites, transcending it, and going into a transcendent realm. Now, another favorite quote of mine from Campbell, from Hero, is, "Myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into human cultural manifestation." And here, again, Chartres, and in the lower right, we have a close-up of this figure above the central door. This is Christ coming through the mandorla, the birth canal of the universe, from a transcendent realm into material manifestation. And so this vehicle of communication between these two realms, that's how Campbell saw myth, and that's what we're seeing in this image here. Campbell would repeat again and again what he called the four major functions of myths: to awaken and maintain a sense of wonder, to provide a map or picture of the universe, to validate and maintain a moral, social, and cultural system, and to aid the individual in their passage through life stages. And so myths are a metaphorical map of our development, our relationships, the development of nations and cultures, our relationship to the cycles of the cosmos, and our relationship to transcendence. Now, Campbell addressed a very wide range of issues. For example, modern art. He had a whole series of lectures on Picasso. Primitive mythologies, very strong interest of his. But I'm just going to look at 5 here: the monomyth, the sweep of history, East and West, the way myths speak to us, and the notion of a new mythology. So, the monomyth, the hero journey. So Campbell's first book of major importance is The Hero with a Thousand Faces, in which he describes the hero journey, a pattern in myths, religions, fairy tale, novels, individual mystic experience, in which the hero is called to the quest and goes through a series of stages. Now, Campbell gives a whole wide range of examples, but roughly the stages of the quest are the call to adventure. So in the case of Odysseus, in the Odyssey, Odysseus sets sail for home from Troy. Separation from ordinary reality at threshold. Odysseus is blown off course and goes to the land of the Lotus Eaters. Now we're going into another realm. Enters a realm of fabulous forces and survives a succession of trials. Odysseus encounters the Cyclops, the Sirens, etc. Wins a decisive victory. Odysseus slays the Cyclops, resists the Sirens, and finally slays the suitors, and returns to enrich the world, and Odysseus and Penelope are reunited. Campbell addresses hundreds of stories, of which only a few we are very familiar, such as the Odyssey, and shows how they manifest this pattern. This book was influential on George Lucas in doing Star Wars, and so in the first Star Wars movie, originally titled Star Wars, now Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Luke Skywalker is in the wasteland. He's on his farm on a faraway planet, longing for something else. And then the call to adventure. He buys some derelict robots, and one of them projects this little hologram, Princess Leia. "Obi-Wan, help me, Obi-Wan." Could that be old Ben? And so Luke goes out and finds old Ben, who's a course, Obi-Wan Kenobi, great Jedi warrior, and he is eventually informed of his heritage, gets his lightsaber, and then at a threshold, the bar scene from there takes off to a realm of fabulous forces, space technologies. He's going to encounter Darth Vader. Now, let's just pause here. One of the stages in the hero journey is the encounter with the Father. And it's not universal, but it's in many of them. And of course, we later find out that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father, and so how they come back into a relationship. And Campbell describes that the son is of the world of manifestation, the father is of the world of universal principles, and the two have to come back into a proper relationship. And George Lucas allows himself 6 movies to fully develop all of this. Luke Skywalker encounters and rescues Princess Leia, and we later discover they are twins, brother and sister, and in fact twins. And one of the first books Campbell made a contribution to, did the introduction to Maud Oakes, where the twins came to their father of a Navajo myth. And so we see this again as a pattern in mythology. And then follow the Force, Luke, and he releases his photon torpedoes, destroys the Death Star, winning a decisive victory, and thus aiding the just cause of the rebels. So this is just one of many manifestations of this hero journey. And what I just described to you is very well documented. So we have, for example, Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey, Mythic Structures for Storytellers and Screenwriters, which expands on his famous 7-page memo for Disney, providing a 7-page summary or guide to Hero with 1,000 Faces. And this is very well known, very well described. But there's much more to the book than just this hero journey. There's also the inner journey, which can be typified by many stories, including the life of the Buddha. And there's also the cycles of the cosmos are a part of this. And so what I just described as a hero journey is only about 1/3 of the book. There's all of this other material in it as well. Now, why is this so powerful? Well, it's the story of every one of our lives. We embark on this journey. It's our lives. Now, the next theme I'm going to look at in Campbell is the sweep of history. And the Campbell is usually interpreted as presenting how, for us, how myths can illuminate our lives. And he does do that, definitely. But he's also presenting the history of our culture. And in a sophisticated level, that also illuminates our lives. They're very different cultures, and kind of aspects of all of them live within us. And Campbell's probably the strongest scholar on world culture in our time. So he undertakes this task in a 4-volume series called The Masks of God: Primitive Mythology, Oriental Mythology, Occidental Mythology, and Creative Mythology, which is coming into our time. Reading this is an education. You will not get this going to 4 years of college, what you'll get from reading these books, but it might take you 4 years. They're 700 pages each, and if you follow all the footnotes and follow up on the ideas and go back to them, it is a major educational experience. Now, he continues this theme in the Historical Atlas of World Mythology. So in the Mass of God, he divides history into traditional historical and geographical eras, but in the Historical Atlas, he looks at 4 great stages of mythological development: hunter-gatherers, planters, high civilizations, and our modern demythologized world. So now the key thing is this atlas was not completed due to Campbell's death. We'll talk a little more about that later, but in the way of the animal powers, he looks at shamanic hunter-gatherers, and the notion is that the individual has an inner experience that calls him or her to the role of a shaman. And very brief quote from this huge book: 2 confounding mysteries of 1, the menstrual cycle of the female and its relevance to birth, and 2, the visionary trance states of the shaman who became thereby supernaturally empowered. Then the way of the seeded earth. With agriculture, seeds are planted, food grows, it's harvested. Seeds from the harvest are again planted the next year. Thus, there's a cycle of birth, death, the harvesting of the grain, cutting it with the scythe, and rebirth. And this becomes reenacted in the rituals of sacrifice and rebirth, from the pig sacrifices in primitive cultures to the crucifixion of Christ. The dominant idea of the sacrifice, an eternal being is given to life in this world, and temporal lives are returned to the eternal world. Life in this world is renewed. Then, in the next volume, planned but not completed, The Way of the Celestial Lights. This is the high civilizations who put themselves in accord with the stars and planets. It's the age of the goddesses, the heroes, the great classics, the great beliefs, and priests and priestesses, ordained and empowered by an institution, replace the shaman who had come upon their powers on their own. The mythological systems of the planets and the moon and the sun, in the measured regularities of their courses through the constellations of fixed stars, the arts of writing and of higher mathematics, kingship and priestly orders, monumental architecture, symbolic temple forms. So these become the dominant forms of the high civilizations. And then finally, our culture today, the way of man, the breakdown of mythological structures, from the Renaissance through the Enlightenment and up to today. Rationalism has grown at the expense of mythology. Theology is replaced by philosophy. Art and culture arise from the efforts of the individual. All phenomenal form, whatever, whether of the earth, of sky, or of the imagination, are recognized as created, pervaded, and upheld by the same will or power that can be experienced within as the very life finally of oneself, so that all of this comes out of oneself. Now, just to zoom in on 2 of the many cultures that Campbell covered, although these are the ones he did look at by far the most, the East and the West. And in the East, Campbell writes, throughout the Orient, the idea prevails that the ultimate ground of being transcends thought, imagining, and definition. It cannot be qualified. Now think what that means. That standing behind and actually within all of creation is something that transcends any concept we can have. He then goes on hence to argue that God, man, or nature is good, just, merciful, or benign is to fall short of the question. One could as appropriately or inappropriately have argued evil, unjust, merciless, or malignant. These are concepts, they are pairs of opposites, and ultimate being transcends that. In the West, the ground of being is normally personified as a creator, of whom man is the creature, and the two are not the same. In the East, this ultimate being pervades everything, including all of nature and all of us. It's one unified thing. In the West, there are two metaphysically different things, the creator and then man, who is his creature. And the two are not the same. So that here, the function of myth and ritual cannot be to catalyze an experience of ineffable infinity, but to rather tell the story. Now, this difference of East and West, and in the material we just saw, Campbell has a real bias for the East. But then he says, well, what does the West have to offer? And he says, the ideas recently developed in the West of the individual, his selfhood, his rights, and his freedom have no meaning whatever in the Orient or in other cultures. They are, in fact, repugnant to the ideas, the aims, and orders of life of most of the peoples of this earth. And yet, they are the truly great new thing that we do indeed represent to the world, and that constitutes our Occidental revelation of a properly human spiritual ideal true to the highest potential of our species. So this is the accomplishment of the West. And we see this notion down to recent times in America's favorite novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And here Huck defies the rules of society and obeys his inner sense of what he should do, even though he knows, quote unquote, I'll go to hell for this. And Campbell sees this very strongly in the Arthurian romances, the tales of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and he quotes from The Quest for the Grail that the Knights of the Round Table were gathered and the Holy Grail appeared veiled, and the knights took a vow that they should go on a quest to see it unveiled, and they thought it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group. So each entered the forest at a point he himself chose where it was darkest and there was no path or way. If there's a path, it's somebody else's path. And in the West, we are asked to identify and manifest our own individuality. Next theme, myths speak to us, and this is one of Campbell's very powerful contributions. Campbell is known for his admonition, follow your bliss, identify your true passion and follow it. He was a very strong proponent of modern art and presented the works of Picasso, Joyce, Mann. He was a scholar of Friedrich Nietzsche and was a proponent of Nietzsche's idea that we are responsible first for conquering ourselves. He would continually contrast the shaman and the priest, the shaman as one who has their own authentic inner spiritual experience, as opposed to the priest who may not have such an experience, probably does not, but is ordained by an institution. And he would often end his lectures with an Indian tale of a tiger. And it's quite long, so I'll just outline that a young tiger is being raised by goats. A powerful male male tiger comes to the herd and they scatter, but this now adolescent tiger who's been raised by them doesn't run because he's a tiger. And the male tiger is shocked to see this tiger among goats, and this tiger doesn't realize he's a tiger, thinks he's a goat. So the male convinces him of who he is and says, and then the moral of the tale is, to his audience, Campbell would say, now go out and be tigers. And today, well, these are difficult times. Campbell writes, the old gods are dead or dying, and people everywhere are searching, asking, what is the new mythology to be? The mythology of this unified earth as of one harmonious being. And then he says, one cannot predict the next mythology any more than one can predict tonight's dream, for a mythology is not an ideology. And he says, when asked how we are to live in our condition, he says, there's nothing to be done. Those gods have died. No effort to be made, for in our very bondage we are free, and in our very striving for release we are linking ourselves to the more to bondage, which is already freedom. And so he looks at the path of the Bodhisattva and in Buddhism as appropriate for ourselves today. And finally, he says, within the time of our lives, it is highly improbable that any solid rock will be found to which Prometheus can again be durably shackled, and that we have shed all fear of the bounding serpent king. Okay, so there's an overview of Campbell, and if you want to pursue these ideas, how might you go about it? And I'll just briefly mention some of Campbell's key works, and I'm going to do them in the order of least difficult to most difficult. So where might you start? And you might start by viewing the videotapes, The Power of Myth, of a public television series where Campbell was interviewed by Bill Moyers. So that'll give you a wonderful introduction, and I recommend it for another reason. Once you've heard somebody speak, and here you can hear Campbell speak in his own voice, when you read him, you can sometimes then hear that voice, and that's very useful. So you can hear not only the voice, the intonation, the pacing, the emphasis, and the way he speaks, and then this will very much enrich your reading. So I recommend those tapes. We'll get to other tapes, and probably the easiest thing to read by Campbell is The Power of Myth, although it's not really by Campbell. This is a transcriptions of the Bill Moyers interviews, and they were done after Campbell died, so he didn't have a part in it. But they'll give you a good sense. Now, actually written by Campbell himself, I'll recommend a book of essays called Myths to Live By. So these were lectures he gave, and they were transcribed and edited into 13 short essays, and they can be read an essay at a time. You don't have to sit down and commit to the whole book. You can read them in any order. You can read them again, one at a time, and they're very accessible. You can really handle this material. After he retired, Campbell lectured continually Really enjoyed doing it. Lectured regularly in New York and then traveled around the country, lectured a lot in California, particularly at Esalen Institute. And he lectured with slides. He had a slide projector. So today it would be PowerPoint. So he became very disappointed in his inability to include these images in his books and felt that these images, the world's art, contained these mythological insights as much as did the stories. And he got the opportunity in a really beautiful book published by Princeton University Press and in Bollingen, The Mythic Image. And there are some very readable, very accessible essays, richly illustrated. And Campbell's major work is The Hero with a Thousand Faces, one of his two major works. And this presents his signature idea of the hero journey, which we have described, but a reminder that there are really three parts to this. The hero journey is only 1/3 of it. There's the internal journey, exemplified by the Buddha, and then this whole process, this cyclical process, this stages in the hero journey are also manifest in the cosmos itself, and he describes that. This is one of the major works of the 20th century, brilliantly written and filled with a wide range of ideas. Campbell very deliberately wrote for a lay audience, but this gets a little difficult. So if you're really strong at absorbing ideas, plunge into this. If you want to sort of get up to speed first, start with some of the stuff I mentioned before. Next, I would say Flight of the Wild Gander. This is a collection of essays. Some of them are not really related to the others. It's sort of a hodgepodge. But there's an essay in here, The Symbol Without Meaning. Some of the quotes at the very end of my presentation earlier come from here. And this is very challenging. He's challenging the whole idea of the role of mythology in our consciousness. So I'll leave it at that. I have a whole lecture on that, which you can access. And next in difficulty, now we're getting really difficult. This is The Masks of God in 4 volumes, Primitive, Oriental, Occidental, and Creative Mythology. I would say these are the most difficult of Campbell's books, but reading them thoroughly is a thorough cultural education. And then the Historical Atlas of World Mythology in multiple volumes, and then each volume is in multiple parts. It was not completed at the time of Campbell's death, so as we referred to earlier, there's 4 of these periods. He only covered 2 of them. The remaining 2 periods, it's all there in his other writing. But this is a geomythic historical sweep of the origins of human thought and culture. It's a masterpiece of bookmaking, richly illustrated, including with images, maps, charts. And there's really quite a bit there if you read it selectively. For example, in Volume 1, Part 1, there's an essay, The Mythic Dimension, which is, I think, the single best overview of Campbell's approach to mythology. And in Volume 2, Part 1, there's an essay, The Historical Forms, which presents Campbell's approach to the sweep of history, myth, and culture. So even within these books, if you don't work your way thoroughly through them, there is some really wonderful material. Now, also, there's the collected works of Joseph Campbell. The Joseph Campbell Foundation is reissuing his key books, and if a publisher gives them one of these books up, they then take it up into this uniform series, and then they are all the foundation is also busy working from Campbell's lectures and unpublished essays to create a whole series of new books, which are really, rich resources. And finally, Campbell's lectures were incredible, and many of the lectures he gave over the years were recorded and are available in several versions through Amazon and elsewhere. And then there are lectures also available through the Joseph Campbell Foundation, jcf.org, and you can get them on iTunes. So let's just wrap up, and if you find this material exciting, I hope you do. Going from here, some questions for discussion, and I won't say anything about them. Hopefully just provoke some thought. Where do myths come from? Do myths reinforce the established power structure? Do myths repeat, or do myths refer to the past, ignoring our changing world? Does follow your bliss harm the social order? Where do we stand regarding materialism, fundamentalism, and transcendence? How should we regard the biblical religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam? Are they to be treated just like other myths, or are they privileged in some way? If so, why? What is the importance to us today of Freud and Jung? Are women and men spiritually the same or different? And what will be the new mythology? Thank you.